It shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that the globe has changed from what it was to what it is now. After all, humans have colonized and expanded throughout it. There are many wonders, both good and bad, but as a result of all that building, something will inevitably be abandoned. This is where urban explorers come into play. They search for areas that haven't seen any activity in a while to see if anything unusual, fascinating, or eerie has been left behind. Keeping in mind that they do occasionally come across some very strange stuff, these are the top 10 most unsettling discoveries found by urban explorers. Number 10. In this clip, a group of urban explorers set out to investigate the Adelaide mine in Australia to see what they could see. Now, just for the record, I don't really advise doing this kind of thing for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that when people don't maintain a mine properly, nature tends to take over, meaning that anything can happen. The mine was originally a copper mine, but eventually it would be abandoned due to a small gold streak, and these explorers decided to dive in. To be honest, they didn't find anything particularly scary, unlike some of the other entries I'll touch on, but they did discover some intriguing findings that might leave you wondering. For instance, the crew discovered the bones of a dead animal deep within the mine shaft. They thought it was a fox, but they weren't positive. They also noticed that many areas of the mine had collapsed, which is what I had warned them about earlier. The last thing you want to do is be inside a structurally sound mine shaft or cave, because if you get trapped inside, you're pretty much screwed. A strange fungus growth that was covering several rocks was another oddity they discovered. I'll include that in the list of reasons why you should never enter a mine unprepared. Number 9. Isn't the deserted forest house an ideal location for a death trap? We've all heard tales about houses tucked away in the woods, safe from prying eyes and ears, yet consider how many gloomy fairy tales feature that location. In any case, Hansel and Gretel got off easy. One day, while giving a lecture, an urban explorer learned of a house that was inside a forest and next to a contemporary house with a long driveway and other facilities. The home's occupant's story, however, is what really made it worthwhile. According to the explorer, the family who lived there allegedly kept their children in cages, so yeah, they're not exactly the parents of the year. Just getting there would be difficult because the house and surrounding area were extremely dangerous, with sharp and rusted farm equipment hidden among weeds, tall grass, and other obstacles. The house was also falling apart, which should have been the first sign that you shouldn't have entered the house. Now, I'll admit that he disregarded the advice and went on, but to his credit, he recognized the risks involved in attempting to fully explore the house given the structural damage that was present. He did attempt to enter a few of the rooms, and that nearly cost him dearly because, as you can see in the video, as he tried to walk around, his foot literally went through the floor. Fortunately, he was able to stop himself, preventing him from falling into the basement below. However, let this serve as another reminder to you to be extremely cautious in these kinds of places. Number 8. I know people who look forward to Halloween every year and who plan ahead for it, but even if you look back at previous years, you'll find some really weird things that people have done. For example, in 2021, the UK decided to create a very different Halloween attraction in a salvage yard. Their idea was to create their own version of a zombie graveyard, but instead of using zombies, they planned to fill the space with massacred mannequins. Well, mannequins aren't all that scary on the surface, but when you put an army of them in one area, in various poses, and with some of them incomplete, and then you have people walk through them at night, well, that's going to freak people out a bit. Besides, the person who happened to own the mannequins and the salvage yard was smart enough to dress things up to make it look even more bizarre. It's pretty scary, and you might think that no one would want to go see such a Halloween walk, but you'd be wrong. Before they even opened it in 2021, they were almost sold out. It just goes to show that people enjoy being scared sometimes, and that they will make things to make people feel scared. Most of the dummies have missing limbs, and one terrifying display features several child dolls surrounding a zombie mannequin in a blonde wig. Number 7. Hospitals are among the places that can easily turn eerie after they're abandoned. In fact, many hospitals around the world are rumored to be haunted by people who have passed away. In this particular typical case, some urban explorers decided to check out a hospital that had been closed for 20 years. According to the person who filmed the entire thing, the hospital had plenty of things to make them squeamish. The hospital in question was opened in the 1960s, I believe, and it closed for financial reasons in 2001. This would explain a lot for one basic reason: almost everything you could possibly imagine being left behind in an abandoned hospital, including vials of blood, medical equipment, And more entire filing cabinets and storerooms with patient files still in meticulous order, posters on the wall, and notice boards showcased that this really was a working hospital up until it was abruptly shut down. That may be the scariest thing of all, because when you stop to think about it, there was no doubt that a lot of medical equipment that could have been sold, donated, or moved to another location could have been used. Additionally, leaving blood behind is a waste for those who need it for surgeries, transfusions, and other needs. But wait, there's more. People who watch the video think they've figured out that it was a hospital in Georgia known as the Bad Debt Hospital. It was up to $1 million in debt with no way out, so they just shut it down. What's alarming is that this also meant that residents had to travel 90 minutes for medical care, which resulted in a number of negative things happening, including an increase in heart attack victims. Number 6. It took me a while, but I'm going to talk about the first ghost town that will be on this list. How many more will there be? Well, who knows, but the first one I'm talking about is Chino, Oregon. Before you ask, was this a gold or silver town? No, it was actually a place that was located next to a massive wool and wheat field back in the early 1900s. The town was called the wool capital of the world because of the amount of wool that was there, and it was also a key location for the Columbia Southern Railway. Given all that was going on in the town, with how many people visited it, how did it end up a ghost town? Indeed, times do change. The town was essentially abandoned after the Oregon-Washington Railroad and Navigation Company opened a route in 1911 that connected Portland to Bend through a river canyon. Over time, the town experienced some population surges as a result of significant construction projects, but by the 1960s, there were only a few dozen residents, and it had become a true ghost town. Although some people still visit the town every year, it is not actually designed to handle large-scale tourism due to certain flaws, so even in its ghost town status, it is disturbing how things continue to happen to it. Number 5. Now here is the Soviet program for space shuttles. This one probably caught your attention because you might not have expected me to travel into space and discuss abandoned locations that people have visited, but here's the thing, at one point, the USSR had nothing more important to focus on than its space program. They were engaged in the infamous space race with the United States, which was supposed to launch man into space and to the moon for the first time. At the beginning of the race, the USSR was winning because they launched the first satellite into orbit and placed man on the moon. But in the end, the USSR essentially abandoned the spacecraft they had been working on to get them into space. And this includes the hangar over in Koch where you can find some of the shuttles that they had worked on to help send them into space. As of right now, they are just kind of there rotting away as though they are waiting for someone to come in and rescue them from their state. Sadly, that's not likely to happen, especially given what Russia has been focusing on recently. Instead, the United States achieved the biggest victory when they sent 2 men to the moon in 1969. Number 4. A farmhouse is something else you might not immediately expect to be abandoned because people occasionally live on farms and frequently pass them down from one family member to another to keep them going. However, in Wales, there is a place known as Grandma's Farmhouse that was abandoned for decades without anyone really knowing why. It's obvious that someone had lived there for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that there are pictures of previous tenants inside the home, and based on what's inside and how they were dressed, they were obviously well off. Even the person who entered the house and took the photos that helped spook the internet acknowledged that there was something slightly strange about the house somewhere called the Brass House. However, based on everything that remained in the house and how much of it was just kind of left there, it is unclear why the previous occupants had left. Let's take a look. There were certain emotions experienced upon entering, and the mystery of who had lived there and why they had left truly filled your mind with ideas and inquiries. However, one of the most striking, and possibly most unsettling, aspects of the house was that, despite its abundance of contemporary conveniences, it lacked a toilet. Number 3. There are some things that are about to get really weird. In this case, a group of French urban explorers went to a Spanish aquarium that had been closed for a while. I'm sure that in the right situations, a bunch of empty water tanks can look scary with the right kind of growth growing on them, but that's not what's disturbing. Even though some of the fish appeared to be more preserved than they had died naturally, the fact that the aquarium's tanks were still filled with fish and other attractions after it closed begs the question of why they would abandon the fish and other attractions. Was there another aquarium that could have taken in these creatures and given them a good life? Why not share the items rather than just leaving them there to perish? Number 2. Unbelievably, there have been several amusement parks based on well-known children's books over the years. What may surprise you the most, though, is how many of them were shut down soon after they opened, because not all endeavors can succeed as much as the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. One such example was the Land of Austin Park in North Carolina, which was constructed in the 1970s but ultimately collapsed. The park's owners swear that it isn't abandoned, which is odd given that they only open it once a year and only for special tour guides where some of the attendees get to play Dorothy or other characters as they travel down the yellow brick road. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this whole situation is the owner's ongoing denial, as they simply acknowledge that Dorothy didn't do well with the park and move on. After all, isn't that part of Dorothy's story, moving down the road? Number 1. Greetings from Gary, Indiana, where you can discover abandoned structures. With over 13,000 abandoned buildings, Gary still has an eerie ghost town feel to it despite being partially inhabited. Galore now, it shouldn't be too surprising that there are a lot of abandoned buildings in one place. It was bound to happen sooner or later given how humanity works. Gary is one of the most deserted locations in Indiana, if not the entire globe. It's a heartbreaking but well-known story. Have a look at that structure. Gary was once a bustling town with a strong economy, but over time everything kind of went apart, which resulted in 1/3 of the area being abandoned. Despite this, people still live there, and numerous attempts have been made to try and repair it to make it less abandoned. However, the irony is that because there are so many of these locations, urban explorers travel from the wazoo to visit the area, and people who thought it needed a little artistic touch have decorated the abandoned buildings. It's quite considerate of them, and who knows what the future holds for Gary and them, but for now it's a semi-lived-in ghost town. That's all there is to it in terms of urban settings and locations where people have discovered some really strange items that people have left behind. Did any of these tales of unsettling discoveries make you shudder, or did you find them to be rather tame? If the latter, perhaps you know of another one that ought to have been included in this list. Tell me all about your exploration and adventures in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.